Welcome back to Passive Income Pilots, everyone. Tait Duryea here with Ryan Gibson. How you doing, Ryan? Studio's looking good.
It's looking great. I'm in Seattle in the studio, and it's nice. I like having actually our chairs in the studio here are actually airline seats.
That's right.
That we
I don't know if
got
we've
from a
ever
real
mentioned that on the
airplane.
show. Yeah, they're pretty cool.
Yeah, we haven't. They're pretty cool. I'm not going to tell you what airplane they're from, though, because everyone's going to think, oh, wow, is it Mad Dog or something?
I remember when you were upset at your employee that chose the
it's fine.
the aircraft.
It's kind of cool. Yeah, but they're CRJ seats. So hats off to the CRJ.
It's
At
so
least
funny.
I think it was like a CRJ 900 at least, or maybe a 700. I'm not sure, but
That's
either way,
good.
they're kind of
That's
cool.
good.
They're kind of cool.
They're cool.
But
They're cool either way.
we have a cool show. We have a cool show
that's
today.
Right.
Yeah. It's interesting. Airline pilots are now making more money, and the last dollars that go into their accounts are the highest taxed. And so, we're like working hard, we're making more money and we have more income.
Diminishing returns.
It's like diminishing returns, like 37.5% of
Plus
the last
state
dollars that you earn, right? Because it's graduated, are getting taxed at the higher tax rate. So like maybe what we do is we change our behavior and we start doing more passive income at the end that has a much lower tax rate, and you don't have to work for it and you don't have to pay the tax on it as bad, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's what we're talking about today.
And also blending in some retirement into your career before you get to 65.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, what do you do? Well, when we're 65, we graduate from the airlines. There's nothing, we're done. We're at the end of our career. We should have some hobbies, and we should start thinking about those hobbies today when we're in our best years. And I think that's what we're going to talk about today as well is, what are some things you can start doing to position yourself financially to sort of not have to fly as much, not have to pay those super high taxes, and start developing great fun hobbies to do while you're still in your best years and your kids are good ages, and all these things, right? So that when you get to 65, like, you have this full life already, and you just continue that on, and and retirement is really exciting. So we're going to get into that. Tait, who's our guest today?
Yeah, Ryan. So today we have Brian Herriot. Herriot is a financial coach for successful entrepreneurs, people who don't have as smooth and steady of income as we do as airline pilots, and really has built an entire philosophy around time freedom versus financial freedom. And I think it's a very interesting concept. We also talk a lot about holding a huge amount of cash, a lot more cash than most people recommend. And I think it's an interesting strategy.
Yeah, I think what we're going to hear a lot about is like, what do you do? How much extra cash should you have around? Where should you put it while it's sitting in there? What types of passive income things can you invest in that are going to produce income? In which order should you buy those things? Should you buy the real estate first, the income producing stock first, things like that? And then we're also going to talk about, I know a lot of listeners are starting to do side investments or buy businesses, things like that, and kind of hear the perspective of somebody who focuses on giving financial advice to those types of people who are doing more of the entrepreneurial thing. Like Tait, I know you and Lucy's entrepreneurial, selling real estate on the side. You're an airline pilot, but also you do some entrepreneurial stuff. So I think it's providing like a really good perspective to both sides of the equation.
Let's be honest, I fly on the side, but yes, absolutely. And a few very right. And a few very important ticker symbols that I think you'll like to put in your portfolio of where to potentially store cash.
So sit down, buckle up, get out your pen and paper, take some notes, and let's get into it.
Brian, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Tait. Thanks for having me, Brian. Appreciate it.
Brian, one thing I find so interesting about what you do is building a foundation of financial philosophy in any portfolio, right? Like, it doesn't matter what's going on in the world. I mean, we've had all kinds of like tariffs and on again, off again, and market going up, going down, and it's just been kind of all over the place. And what's so nice about your approach to this has just been steady Eddie, stay the course, have a philosophy, have a proven methodology that works. Can you kind of tell us your background and maybe why you got to that point in your career where you just have this really well-worn playbook?
Yes, I can definitely do that. So just kind of out of the gate, I'm an independent financial advisor for entrepreneur types. So my company's Herriot Financial, but I have not been a financial guy my whole life, right? And so I started this company because of what I've learned throughout the years, which is we need like this kind of integrated, comprehensive look at our finances. And it's not just about the investments and the money, which could be a good thing considering where things are going, these days. But let me give you a little bit of background, and then we can talk about some of the individual components, if that's helpful. But I've always been a financial freedom, financial independence kind of guy, coming right out of school. Good college, good job, save early, all the things that you're supposed to do, and then got kind of close to financial freedom in 2020 in January, and then in February, March, got hammered. And that's where I made a mistake. And that has informed me in the years since and kind of driven everything that's happened in my career and in my personal life, everything in the last 5 years. And what had happened was I had to tell my wife in that moment of making a mistake that our, financial freedom that was going to happen next year is really more going to be like 15 or 20 years. And her reaction was quite interesting. It wasn't, oh no. It was, what are you going to retire to anyway? What are you going to do with yourself? And I had no answer to that question. And so I kind of walked away and came back like a week later after I thought about what that was. And I said, I don't know, maybe some of the same stuff, but maybe a little bit less of it. And her answer was, well, you're not really retiring then. And, you should probably figure that out. And so what I realized is that financial freedom, just having enough money saved up in my 401k and whatnot so that I could never do anything again was not really what I wanted. What I wanted was the freedom and the choice to choose what I do, and I wanted it as early as possible. And so I now call this concept time freedom. And the finances are extremely important, but it's a breadth of finances. And that is what kind of stabilizes my philosophy and how I look at things and staying the course. So I live my life now kind of looking at a particular year. I call it the time freedom formula, which is, you've got these expenses to cover, and then you've got investment income that you can use to live off that, and then also flexible income. And if you can put those things together nicely in a particular year and then, project it out into the future, you can actually live a quite a good life very much sooner than most, and for longer than most, and also not be 100% reliant in retirement situation on the markets. And so that's kind of what got me to this point. And we can go look at each of those components and how they apply to pilots and whatnot. But I just wanted to kind of set the stage with that.
Yeah, I love this, Brian. I mean, this is, if you've ever read the book, The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, one of the big things the big points that he makes in that book is that, what are you working so hard to retire at 65? And then what you're going to go sit on a beach? Like, you're going to be bored stiff in 2 weeks. So the goal should be more of a lifestyle creation that blends in with work versus just trying to work as hard as you can and stuff as much money into a sack as possible and then just quit cold turkey. And I think a lot of people struggle with that. They get to 65 and it's like, oh, what's next? And people go into depression. It's tough. So I love this concept.
Yeah, you need to be thinking about, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Ryan.
As an airline pilot, what do we do when we retire at 65? What are we going to do with our lives?
Right.
That's what we constantly struggle with, right? What hobbies do we have? What is going to fill our cup, as they say? What are going to be the things that we do that satisfy us? And you got to start doing that now. You got to start taking the steps to get hobbies and have a life outside of flying, because flying is life. I mean, we hit the road, we're in our layovers, we're in our overnights. And I think building this kind of financial freedom to do these things and start thinking about this lifestyle now is so important to the health of your retirement as an airline pilot after 65.
Absolutely.
When I told my wife about, the fact that, financial freedom wouldn't come for another 15 or 20 years. And then we decided that I really just wanted, to work more flexibly. that solution happened in 3 years. So, so come up to present day, 5 years ago, I had this epiphany. 4 years ago, what did we do? In line with what you're talking about, we bought our forever cabin on a pristine lake in northern Wisconsin. Like where my wife grew up, where I vacationed as a kid. 3 years ago, we spent our first summer there. 2 years ago was the first summer that I didn't work there. And last summer, I got to see my kid learn how to water ski, which is a huge thing in our family, going back generations. And so those are the life goals and the reasons for living that I think we can pull forward in our lives and not have to wait until 65, as long as we put the financial pieces of the puzzle together to do that.
Well, let's talk about those financial pieces. So what were you doing pre-COVID and what was the switch? What did you start doing after COVID?
Pre-COVID, I had worked up to that point, being big consulting, Accenture, ultimately took a job at UCSF Health in the San Francisco Bay Area, working on a big project there as a director, opening a new hospital. And I was, just running on all cylinders, had a young baby at home and none of that was happening. But then, usually something crazy happens and you get a job demotion. And on the side, I had a software company that I had started in the healthcare space. But then when COVID hits, that dries up, the market crashes, everything happens. So what I did is take an independent consulting gig at a local client out here in San Francisco Bay Area and realized that it was quite lucrative, very flexible, got rid of all the politics and administrative stuff. And I'm like, wow, this work thing could actually be pretty nice. And also I can align the projects so that they start and end at certain times. And that there was just a lot of flexibility that, that not a lot of typical corporate jobs have. And that ended up being almost the secret key to unlock the rest of the things. And so, that flexible income piece of the time freedom formula is a huge component.
This sounds exactly to me like somebody going from, commuting to a base that they can hold captain and they're sitting reserve, in a crash pad for 18 days a month to saying, screw it, I'm going to take a more junior aircraft in base, and all of a sudden the schedule just being amazing. That may be only applicable to a small handful of our pilot listeners, but that's what's resonating for me there.
Yeah, and I think a big fear I always have in talking about this lifestyle is there's a lot of books, not a lot, but there's some books about having achieved enough. I don't know if you where, you get to this point in your career and, it's time to kind of kick back and, take advantage of the skills I built, but relax. That's not me at all. And so just the fact that I, don't work during the summers and then I can water ski and stuff doesn't mean that I don't have big, aspirations for what I think I can do, because, in my philosophy of time freedom first, financial freedom follows, we can't forget the second part. But I also feel like it's only when you have the time to kind of come back out of the day-to-day grind of the work that you're doing that you can actually start to think, all right, what does that mean? And how could I pursue something that I'm not doing right now that could 10x my income versus make it 10%, do 10 things 10% better.
Right. Implement all the strategies you've learned on this show. Go buy that short-term rental. Go buy that property, go start that business.
Yeah. And before the show, we talked about the importance of having cash on hand. And I know that there's a lot of things that we can talk about on this, but that was one thing that you really stressed was the importance of cash on hand, and something that we stress as well, having that reserve and, how much is enough and how much is too much, because you don't want to have so much cash that you're missing out on investing in something that has a better return. And you don't want to have too little cash that you can't cover shortfalls and take advantage of opportunities when they come up. So how do you balance how much cash to hold on to, and how do you store it?
Yep. My philosophy here is that your investing approach has to match your goal. And in my case, the people I work with, their goal is to have, a free and flexible life. So what that means is you're going to potentially have inconsistent income. And so you may need access to your money sooner than most. And so this was the stark reality that I had in 2020 when I was so close. Like I had lived through, the 2008 great financial crisis and didn't stress because the market was down, because I could invest and it would grow up forever. But eventually you need to use your money. And so that's where I've, come along. And actually Morgan Housel in Psychology of Money puts out, his belief in that, he says even personally, he holds far more, cash equivalent in a money market or savings, high yield savings account than the average person does in the investing crowd that he speaks to, because the argument they have is, it's a drag on your returns. You should be fully invested in all these things. But I believe that you should have enough cash because you don't know when the markets are going to take a turn south. And maybe it's also when you have an extra 3 months off and you need to use that money to live on and maintain this free and flexible life. You don't want to have to run right back to that position that's full-time and stressing you out. So I believe in a 10% cash. So I based mine on some old advice from Warren Buffett. It was in one of his letters to Berkshire Hathaway shareholders, which was, when I am dead and gone, I'm going to give my money to my heirs and I'm going to put it in, 90% in a stock index fund and 10% in cash. Now, I think that's a starting point. Not all of us have that much money. 10% of a whole lot of money is still a lot of money. So I start there and then have what I advise a 10% cash swing. So typically your cash on hand that I would recommend would be between 10 and 30% of your overall investments. And another viewpoint that I look at it is it's nice to have between 6 months and 2 years of living expenses available in cash for whatever reason, because, when markets are down and things are crazy, that cash is actually the most valuable asset that you own. And, and it's more than just an emergency fund. Like I think cash is that much more important in kind of an overall investment strategy. And I'll just add one.
That's if you use it, right? If you strike when there's a big market correction like there was last week with the tariffs being announced, we saw this massive nosedive in the equities markets. Is that a point where you've reached into that treasure trove of cash and deployed a bunch?
Yes, cash, I believe, is very defensive and very offensive at the same time. So, defensively, you can use it to protect yourself in bad times, but offensively, yeah, and it can be based on where your skill set is at. So, in other words, if you're a markets person, yes, absolutely. If you have some cash, you can deploy it. Back in 2008, when the market was down, I'm like, yeah, I'd love to put some cash in here, but I didn't have anything. Or it's a business opportunity that comes your way, real estate or anything. If you are fully deployed and tied up, you can't take advantages of opportunities when they present themselves. So again, like I could argue that the cash and the 3, 4, 5% return it has, that investment in the business that then gives you 200% return, that's actually a cash return. Right. It's just how you translated it over.
That's a good point.
You mentioned having enough reserves for 6 months to 2 years, and then you mentioned 10 to 30% of your holdings should be cash. Can you kind of unpack that a little bit more? Because, for some people, saving up that initial reserve will be like 100% of their investment portfolio for our younger investors. And then as we mature in our investing in our careers, that will become then, is it you want to have
could be
2 years
as 5%. I mean, 2 years for somebody who's 60 and has a $10 million, $15 million net worth. I mean, that could be much, much smaller.
Definitely. Like when you go on the extreme on the low end or the extreme on the high end, you're going to have to kind of choose where it fits. But yeah, if you have an extremely high net worth, 2 years of your living expenses might be less than 10%. Certainly. That's a guideline. And I also, I love the idea of ranges because different people have different scenarios that they're working through. If you're going to, be investing in your business and you may not make any money for 3 years, you should make some adjustments and hold the appropriate amount of cash so that you're able to stay the course.
Okay. So Brian, as an airline pilot, I have cash reserves and I'm looking for the most strategic place to store it. It drives me nuts just looking at cash sitting in an account doing nothing when it could be out there working for me. So where do you keep it so that it's generating some sort of return?
Yeah, there's usually 3 good places to put it, and the returns will be slightly different. And so you should look and see what's most appropriate. First of all, don't put it in your checking account. Where you want to typically have it, the easiest place would be a high yield savings account, usually at an online bank, like an Ally or something like that. The other, where I currently have mine, is in my brokerage account in a money market, a high yielding federally backed money market.
What's
because it's easy. It's easier to move, when you do want to deploy it when the market's down, it's right there. And then there are also, the Warren Buffett method is to buy short-term US Treasury bills. But that's complicated to do. There's some new services that are making it easier, like Public, I think is the name of the company. But there are actually ETFs that you can buy that own those. That would be another way to go about it. And at one point, a couple of years ago, I did a full analysis on all of these. And when I looked at that point in time, one of them was slightly better than the others. But then I did it a year ago and another one was flipped. But again, I don't think we're putting our cash to work to get some interest back. But, if it's 4.7 versus 4.9, that doesn't really make too much of a difference. So usually it's wherever's most convenient. And as long as it's not in a checking account, like I said.
Perfect.
What's like a good rate?
Right now? Well, it depends. And as far as I know, since last week, it's totally changed. I don't know, but I would say in the upper 4s is probably what I'm seeing right now. Yeah.
Brian, can you share the ticker symbols of the money market accounts that you were using in your brokerage and maybe that ETF?
Yes. So for money markets, you're going to, typically pick it, like you said, in your brokerage. The Vanguard one that I can state as the prime money market, it's now called the federal money market. It's VMFXX. VMFXX. I have also the Fidelity Government Cash Reserves. Ticker is FDRXX. And if you are looking for a Treasury bill ETF, there's 2 that I can share. One is the iShares 0 to 3 month Treasury bond ETF. It's ticker SGOV, SGOV. And there's also the Spider Bloomberg 1 to 3 month T-bill ETF. The ticker is BIL, BIL.
There we go.
Can you talk to passive income strategies? This is the Passive Income Pilots podcast. You put some money in cash, and obviously that's going to kick off some interest in some distributions. But what about the rest of your portfolio? How is it generating income that you can take advantage of today versus waiting for retirement or an arbitrary age?
Yeah. In the flexible income part of the time freedom formula, I break that down in 2 different ways of looking at it. One I call flexible work, and then passive income, right? And so the passive income, to get to your specific question, is going to be including things like, real estate income, of course, especially if it's, through what do you guys call yourselves?
Like syndication or
syndication. Yeah, syndications. Yeah. And some of the funds that are put together.
Brian, if I'm an airline pilot and, I've got my cash allocation for rainy day and for allocation, what are the other buckets you're putting your money into to generate passive income so I can benefit today from income versus waiting until I retire?
Yeah, I think you're going to have, when it comes to passive, there's completely passive, and then there's, some involvement. So they span the spectrum, but you're talking about things like affiliate income or royalties or licensing income or dividend stock income, real estate syndications. There's a full long list, and you kind of have to map them out in terms of what takes the least amount of my time.
I love that. Because I don't think a lot of people are looking for another job, or, they might be looking for a hobby, but definitely not another job. So what would you say are the things in that list that you talked about that are going to be the most hands off? Like, I have an extra $100,000 I'm earning a year that I'm looking for a home. I've filled up my cash reserve buckets. My employer has matched an awesome amount of retirement cash into my 401k. And I've got my spill cash from my cash balance plan. I've got my life insurance investments. I've really filled up all my buckets. I've got that extra $50,000, $100,000 laying around. Where am I putting that to generate passive income, maybe a monthly distribution where I'm not having to get myself another job to do it?
Yeah, I think there's probably 3 main things. One is going to be your high dividend paying stock. Another would be real estate syndications or funds or something like that, certainly. And then the third one, which I wouldn't put, take off the, which I would also include, would be some sort of passive ownership in a business. So this could be anything from, investing some money in your kids' business or utilizing the knowledge that you have within the airline industry to know that there's some new company out there that's got a really cool thing, or maybe not a new cool thing, but just a service that's great and they're looking for additional investors. And you could put your money in, give them a little advice and just collect, a passive income out of that.
In terms of prioritization, right? Because some of those things come with liquidity, meaning that, an income producing stock, I can push a button, have that money back, right? Then you have real estate syndications where you don't get the money back until the property sells or it refinances. That could take 5 to 10 years versus, an investment in a business probably falls in the same bucket, kind of in order of priority. Kind of how would you allocate into something like that to start building up a passive income portfolio?
Yeah, I think I would do it almost, in the exact order that you suggested, which is anything you put in the stock market is, very quickly and very easily liquid. Probably real estate's second based on the deal agreement and, what the likely ownership period is. And then, the business will likely be third. Although, if you're investing I don't necessarily recommend investing in a venture startup or something like that. I'm far more interested in investing in something that's a profitable business that's generating money, and perhaps they're trying to move from the West Coast to the East Coast. And so, that, the money, the mailbox money will be coming a lot sooner than if you were,
Reminds me of
investing
Toby
in a seed
Mathis
fund.
talking about investing in King and Friend's Pizza Shop, right? Pizza.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're passive, right? So it's passive
Exactly.
income.
Yeah. So I guess, we talked about, 10 to 30% of your money being in cash. And then you talked a little bit about, maybe an index fund or investing there. Let's break down the allocation. So beyond that 30% or 10, I'll call it 10% cash. How much of that income producing stock versus the real estate syndication versus the friend's business? Maybe that's like a question mark if you even do that or not. But how much allocation are we putting in both, and how do you go about, like, as a percentage picking that?
Yeah, I think of those as two separate things. So the 10 to 30% cash is really part of your stock investment portfolio, your 401ks and, things like that. And the income that you can withdraw, the 4%, if you use the 4% rule, that is contributing to what you're living on. But then you have that other component, which is the flexible income, which is the passive income and the flexible work. So I actually think of them separately. But what you do is you're going to take your cash allocation from 30% down to 20%, and that means you have $200,000. You take that and you put that over, and you can move it over if the opportunity's good. If the opportunity's good and you can get a good, income stream, that's when you would do that. If nothing is working right now, then just leave it be.
Speaking of it, leave it be. This has been a rocky week in the markets. You got any wisdom as a, financial guy for anybody that's getting a little scared?
Oh, that's a good question. One is nobody really knows what's going to happen. And so don't trust anybody that tells you that they do. That's one piece of advice. I think my second piece of advice is turn the TV off, because you're going to get, wound up. And then third is sometimes, even though it's not ideally, you would have put together a strategy ahead of time so that you could survive 2 years of down markets. But if you were like I was in 2020, that I wasn't there. So it's at that point that you're like, okay, now is a good opportunity to kind of reallocate and figure out if I should have 5 to 10 to 30 or whatever percent in cash. And that just gives you the confidence to be able to stay the course, because you really don't want to sell when things are down, because this is actually kind of interesting that it's obvious when you think about it, but not many people think about day to day. And that's called the theory of loss asymmetry, which is, if you have something worth 100 and it drops to 50, you've lost 50%. What does it take to recover? It's not 50%, it's 100%. So like to recover from a loss is at that level is twice as it's twice as hard to come back. And so the goal there is to minimize losses. So like if it drops by 5%, I think you have to go back up 6%. If it drops 25%, you have to go up 33%. But if it drops 90%, you have to gain 900% back in order to get back to even, right? And so loss is just loss, and the power of cash is not talked about enough, I believe, in investing. And it's because it's not very sexy, but it is extremely important in difficult times, and it gives you opportunities to invest in those real estate, opportunities to give you income. I think it's extremely important.
What would you say to the Grant Cardones of the world that say cash is trash, you shouldn't save your money, it should always be invested? What would you say to that?
I would say that you have to figure out what your goal is. If your goal is to generate maximum wealth, then I agree you should leverage up and put not only have no cash, but have negative cash because you've taken out, leverage and loans in order to make investments. If that's your goal, that's great, right? And so I don't disagree with that at all if that's your goal. My goal, though, is to have a stress-free, time-free life of, it's not maximum wealth. It's enough wealth to do everything I want to do and have, money to give to my son when I die. I want to do all that, but it doesn't have to be $200 million. It can be 10 or 15 or 20, but I think you can still achieve great wealth, but still have the freedom. And so because of that, I look at, zero cash or negative cash in the form of debt as the opposite of freedom, because, you're signing up for future payments. It is the opposite of freedom. And so, in general, unless it's, on an asset that's, sound, unless it's good debt, I do tend to stay away from debt.
Now, that's a really good differentiator because, I'm, kind of leaning towards the Grant Cardone side of the spectrum. I love, utilizing debt. I think that in inflationary times, borrowers are rewarded and savers are punished because the value of cash drops versus you're paying a 6-7% interest rate. But if inflation is ripping at 5 or 6%, your real rate is only a few percentage points and you inflate out of your debt. A lot of people think, over 30 years, oh my God, I'm going to pay all this interest on this house that I bought. But, that $3,000 a month payment 30 years down the road is going to be pennies. You're going to look back and it's going to be a nice dinner out is going to be $3,000 in 30 years just because of the way inflation ticks on. So I love the different perspective. I love different ways of looking at things. I think that's the beauty of this show is we don't lean one way or the other. We bring in all these perspectives and people can balance it because I think that a real sound financial foundation is built on balance, balancing perspectives. And then also you're able to lean one way or the other, depending on your goals and objectives and your personality.
And I still think you can take bits and pieces from each because your argument about the value of a low interest mortgage, like the mortgage on my home and my cabin is like 2.85% or whatever. That's probably that's the most valuable part of the whole deal. Right? It's not actually probably even the real estate. It's that mortgage. So don't pay off those. If you have those, don't pay off your low interest debt. Don't pay them off early. Don't pay them off early. Let me say that. Pay them off, but don't pay them off early. Yeah.
Brian, we really appreciate your time on here. But, as we're looking through like getting financial advice from advisors and people as airline pilots, what's the difference between someone like you who you mentioned are doing financial advice for entrepreneurs versus giving that to maybe someone who's not an entrepreneur, like an airline pilot? What would be the main differences?
Most financial advisors want to work with people who have stable incomes and large accounts. And because you can manage that money and you can get a percentage off of that, right? The difference in working with an entrepreneur is that there is not stability always in income. There's also potentially no retirement account, right? Because those individuals they've chosen to invest in their businesses, not in the market. And that audience is underserved, in my opinion, because the typical financial advisor is not looking comprehensively at income, the work you're doing, and the money you have in the markets, and the passive income that you have, like the whole gamut, which I feel is more important for an entrepreneur because they're relying on those other parts more than the typical money in the markets.
Yeah, good perspective.
I can completely resonate with this because my wife, Lucy, is a realtor, and she'll have great quarters where she makes a ton of money. And she'll also have quarters where it's down, it's dry, and the pipeline just kind of dries up. And she doesn't have a 401k that the company feeds into. She doesn't have tax withholding. She has to hold money back to pay taxes. It's a completely different ballgame. We're really lucky as airline pilots.
That's a great point. And then now I'm really curious. So Tait, you have this perspective where your wife is a entrepreneur and you're an airline pilot. Now I know, Tait, you're doing your fund at, Turbine, and you're an entrepreneur and a pilot. But Brian, what about somebody who's got a spouse that's doing the entrepreneurial thing, who's married to an airline pilot, who's more stable? Like, do you kind of thread that needle really well there?
Yeah, I mean, that's why financial advice is so independent, because everyone's situation is different. I think you have to have like a common framework that you look at, and then different individuals based on their career and the stability of earnings and how much they've saved. And also, I think how they view money is another hugely important piece. Like, are they like me who save and invest? Are they like my son who's like, I'll go make more money? Like, I'm not, I'll just go make more money and that's how I'll be financially free. Like, you have to be able to incorporate all of those unique aspects of the situation to be able to then project, what's ultimately a successful plan. Yeah, and that means not just that you don't run out of money, but that you're left with whatever you want to pass on.
Yeah, and I think that's important because I think there's a lot of listeners of the show who have a spouse that works in real estate sales, like Tait, and then they fly for the airlines. Their other spouse, the other better half is flying for the airlines or whatever. So it's good to have perspective about both. And I just wanted to make that point. I think is it's good to know both sides of it and kind of have somebody working with you that's clearly understood. Brian, thank you so much for your time today. How can listeners learn more about who you are, potentially get in contact with you, et cetera?
Yeah, I have a free resource that I think could be helpful. If you do have flexible income or you're interested in the time freedom philosophy, and that is an online calculator. It's at timefreedomcalculator.com, and it's 100% free, and you can, put normal set of numbers in there. It's not overwhelming, but it's also quite powerful. And you can see quickly how moving some different levers around will actually, project and make you successful and get you all the time and financial freedom that you want.
We'll definitely link to that in the show notes. I'd also like to give a shout out to Ryan for framing the better half as the airline pilot. Spoken like a true pilot.
That was a word slip, and but you know what? I'm just going to go with it.
We'll keep it.
I'm just going with it. I love it.
Brian, this has been fantastic. If people want to reach out to you directly, how do they get in touch?
Yeah, they can check out timefreedomcalculator.com, or my business website is herriotfinancial.com.
We'll link to that in the show notes. Thank you so much for the wisdom.
Thanks.